Episode 218, the Expert Series with Cristina Caldwell. Welcome to the Pursuit of the Perfect Race. I'm Coach Terry Wilson, and with each episode, I bring stories of athletes to you that share their experiences at races in order for you to learn how to have your perfect race. We will hear stories from athletes of all ages, abilities, and races of all distances. So regardless of where you fit in, there's something in there for you. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now let the pursuit begin. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pursuit of the Perfect Race. I continue my expert series with my friend Cristina Caldwell. Cristina is a level 2 certified coach with USA Triathlon, and she has her master's degree in exercise physiology with sports nutrition. Not only is Cristina a coach, she is also a mother of 2, triathlete herself, and Ironman athlete. Today we discuss so many things about nutrition and dive into all things nutrition. Welcome to the show, Cristina.
Thank you so much, Terry.
Hey, so where should we begin with all this nutrition talk?
Oh my goodness, there's so much to talk about with nutrition. There's all sorts of stuff in social media. There's things you hear from your friend, fellow training partners, friends on Facebook. So we can start anywhere. We can start with general nutrition. We can start with race day nutrition, with hydration, really anything you want to start with. I'm open.
Okay, well, of all the people I've interviewed on the podcast, I always ask, how many calories per hour are you getting? And I've had a wide range from 80 calories all the way to upwards of over 800 calories per hour on the bike. It's a massive range here, but I have found that at around 300 to 350, maybe even 400 calories an hour is about the best calories for general people to actually have a solid race. If you go over that, you're going to have GI distress. You're going to be in the Porta John lot. If you go under that, you can go under that depending on your weight. If you weigh like 110, 120, somewhere in that range. But if you go much lower than that, you're going to have a bad day because you don't have enough power. So where is the good balance in that?
Sure. That's a great question. And the one of the most important things to understand in nutrition is that it's very personal and individualized. So what works for me may not work for you, may not work for your best friend or your training partner. So if you can handle 400 calories an hour, your training partner may only be able to handle 300 calories per hour. So the most important thing is to know that there is no one perfect number to achieve. It's more of you need to practice and train with it to make sure it's going to be appropriate for you with training and racing. Now, to kind of back up and give a little bit of a, kind of a parameter, then the low end, you really want to be shooting for most athletes. It's going to be, let me start with the triathlete. So on the run, you can take in less calories than on the bike because you're jostling more. It's harder on the body versus when you're on the bike, it's a little bit easier to digest. So on the run, I have athletes taking less calories. On the bike, they can take in a bit more. So if you're a pure runner or you're training for a marathon, oftentimes I have athletes start in the 150 to 200 calorie range per hour. If you're a triathlete or you're working, bike kind of specific, or you're focusing on the bike portion of an Ironman, it's generally more in the 200 to 300 calorie per hour range. And that comes from 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrate is the ideal kind of range for an athlete on the bike specifically. So that's about 240 to 360 calories. Anything more than that, and the body really can't. It's really going to have a hard time to utilize those calories. The body is going to most likely have some GI distress. Now, if that athlete you were talking about actually did take in 800 calories an hour, that would be amazing to me that they were able to take that in and not get GI distress. But again, everyone's different. So, kind of like easy answer would be for on the bike, I'd focus, between maybe 2 to 350. And on the run, I'd focus between maybe 150 and 250. Wow. Those would be my 2 ranges.
So I always ask what products athletes use, and F2C is by far the most common nutrition product out there. It's a Canadian-based company, very well-rounded. but I've only had just a handful of athletes actually use UCAN and do the whole fat adaptation thing. And just based on what I see objectively, their speed is not as fast as those who are using the traditional sugar and glycogen storage, whatever. I'm not a scientist in that realm by any means, but if you're not using sugar, you're not going fast. What do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so that's a good point, and it's one thing that I like to encourage athletes is to always start using a carbohydrate-based product. And so, yes, you can, and there's other products like the F2C actually has a super starch product called Glycodurance, I believe it is. And so you don't have to use UCAN specifically. It could be Glycodurance, UCAN, Vitargo. There's a couple of other companies out there that are super starch based. But you're right. There is no evidence. There's no kind of either research-based evidence, or most of the anecdotal evidence we see is the athletes that do the super starches aren't any faster from a performance standpoint using the super starch than an athlete is that uses a carbohydrate product. And you don't have to be fat adapted or kind of going that low carb, high fat realm to use a super starch. Often athletes that have GI issues with sugar can try a super starch and see if it works for you. And I always kind of give that caveat of it definitely isn't going to make you perform any better than a sugar-based product would, unless the sugar-based product is affecting your GI system and you're able to perform without GI distress. That's a win-win. Okay. But I always recommend starting with normal sugar-based, carbohydrate-based products because the research is there that the body wants to use the simple sugar the most, because when you're training and racing, your body is going through all these processes of trying to get blood through to the muscles. And if you're trying to take a product in and break it down, someone that's eating whole foods or using something that's not as quickly digesting, it's going to take longer and be harder for the body to break down. And when you're racing, especially high intensity, you don't want the body to have to work harder to get its nutrients and its calories. You want simple and easy. So going with simple sugars tends to be the best option for athletes as long as they can practice with it and know they're not going to develop GI distress.
Okay. So what about athletes that are doing this keto diet and trying to incorporate that into their endurance and lose weight by just staying with that?
Yeah. So keto is something where I would be okay with an athlete doing it for a short time if they're trying to jumpstart a weight loss. Like if they're just like they're in a rut and they just need to jumpstart, I just need to lose 5 or 10 pounds and I'm just having trouble. Okay, well, you can try a ketogenic diet, but I'm not a fan of it long term because I don't think, one, it's sustainable for most athletes long term. It's it just tends to be very hard to consume 70 to 80% of your daily intake from fat alone. If someone wants to just lose some weight, giving it a shot is one thing. If someone wants to try to be on it long term, then yes, what happens when you're in ketosis or you're fat adapted, quote unquote, the body becomes harder to actually use carbohydrates for fuel because you haven't been taking in carbohydrates. So I have some athletes that they'll say, I'll just do carbohydrates products while I'm racing, even though I'm fat adapted. And what happens is your body down regulates the ability to use the enzymes that you need to break carbohydrates down. So it becomes really more of it's not going to work. So in that sense, you want to try something that's like a super starch or like the Vitargo or UCAN. I actually would prefer the Vitargo over UCAN personally.
What's Vitargo?
It's another super starch.
Okay.
So it's actually it's definitely a European-based company. I'm sure it's definitely sold in the U.S., but it's more well known, I think, out of the U.S. And actually, I think Glycodurance is probably one I would choose as well. Just looking at their research that they have behind it.
Okay.
And that's F2C.
So as far as best practices for losing weight, I mean, we're talking about mainly, let's talk about the 70.3 and full Ironman athletes that are ramping up training upwards of 12 to 25 hours of training. How are we wanting to actually get them to lose weight effectively without risking injury because they're not eating enough, but yet they're still able to maintain power but still lose weight? Like, this is an ongoing struggle for so many athletes.
Definitely. And my best advice is to not try to lose weight when you're in the heaviest portion of your training. So the way I break down my athletes training might be the, base and build and peak and taper, kind of that traditional periodization. I encourage athletes to only focus on achieving their goal race weight when they're doing their base phase or they're out of season. So when you're trying to, train 15, 20 hours a week and you're trying to cut calories, exactly what you said can happen. They'll get injured. They can't recover as well because they're not refueling their body what it needs to recover. And so if you can try to achieve your goal race weight in the beginning of the season versus trying to do it when you're really training hard, that's the best plan in my view.
But mentally, I mean, that doesn't make sense because it's like, hey, I have all this high volume of hours, I should be able to lose weight. But in reality, you gain weight because you overeat.
Exactly. It's the exact opposite. So I tend to find that athletes that train for sprints and Olympics tend to be able to maintain their ideal race weight a lot easier than athletes training for half and full Ironman. Because when you're out and doing a 6-hour bike ride, you have to replenish those 6 hours of calories. So if in those 6 hours you're burning, 3,000 calories, let's just say, you need to refuel. It's not like you can just not, consume those additional calories. And so people tend to find they're hungrier with Ironman training, and that they tend to be like, I just rode for 6 hours. I can go eat X, Y, and Z, which may not be what they're normally used to eating. And so they end up eating foods that they're not used to eating, maybe overindulgent kind of options. And then they tend to not be able to lose weight because they're so hungry. Whereas the sprint and Olympic athletes, or if you're focusing on maybe short, high intensity stuff, that actually tends to decrease your hunger, whereas long distance tends to increase your hunger.
Wow. So what's the dangers of overeating after these long bike rides? Because I've done century rides, Ironman as well, and I have a lot of experience working with athletes in this, just like yourself. How can you address the dangers of overeating and undereating? Because I feel like undereating is, especially for women, they always want to look good in their bikinis and all that. How is this dangerous?
Sure. Yeah. I definitely would say it's more dangerous to undernourish your body when you're training long course than it is to overnourish. Overnourishing, you might either maintain your current weight or add a few pounds, but you should be at least refueling what your body has burned. And so you should be entering your next workout well recovered or well fueled. Whereas the undernourishing is exactly the opposite. If you're trying to lose weight, let's say you did that 6-hour ride and you burned 3,000 calories and you maybe only consumed an extra 500 calories that day. You're putting yourself in a deficit where you're not replenishing what you're burning, and most likely you're not going to be refueling your muscles. And so with glycogen, and so what tends to happen is you start your next workout. So you get up the next morning to do swim, bike, or run, whatever you're doing or lifting, and your muscles are undernourished or they're low on glycogen. And so you're starting that workout subpar. So it's almost like a cascade where if you've undernourished one workout, the next workout's going to be undernourished, and this will repeat. And the risk of injury is much greater. And then the risk of something going hormonally wrong is tends to happen. So athletes that are consistently restricting calories will not always, but they can kind of screw up their hormones if they are taking in too little calories. So not only do you go the route of injury kind of risk, then you have the overtraining route, which often goes hand in hand with hormonal imbalances due to low calorie intake. So there's a lot of like overtraining and injury risk if you're not, let's, take aside performance as one thing, but then injury risk and overtraining is added to that lack of performance if you're undernourished.
Right. It sounds like that just by undernourishing one workout, you literally can not only fall into the overtraining mindset, but you can also fall into a little bit of depression because you're not hitting the power, you're not hitting the paces, you're not hitting the heart rate. You're not able to hit any of this because you're undernourished, and then that's a negative downward spiral that leads going into bad mindsets of your overall outlook on the race, everything.
Definitely. It causes, one day won't do it, but if you consistently week after week have your, undernourished your long workouts, the rest of the week can be set up for, those issues. And so with consistency of doing the undernourishing with your training, you can certainly not only have the physical issues that happen, but the emotional side of it, which it would be like the depression, the, just frustration, and even like, heart rate, like you said, like it can manifest in many different ways, whether you can't hit a heart rate zone because you're, feeling too weak to get there. Or if you're overtrained, if your heart rate's too high because the sympathetic nervous system is kind of kicking into high gear with overtraining. So it can manifest in a lot of different ways, but mentally, emotionally, physically, lots of negative things can happen if you're consistently undernourishing your training.
Right. Well, what about athletes that have high stress jobs and are doing Ironman and say they have to be a certain weight for their job and they can't go over that, and then the stress is causing them to overeat, and then it's impacting their performance because they're overeating now, but they feel hungry from working out and they're trying to balance all these different realms. What about that?
Yeah. So the work-life training balance is huge. And it's one reason why having a coach is really important, is because the coach can help you to balance that, your training with your home life and your work life. And so if you have an athlete that has a job that requires them to be at a certain weight and they feel like they're emotionally overeating, that's one area where I would suggest that they reach out to someone who has experience with overeating or emotional eating. And that could be a counselor or a dietitian. It could be your general care practitioner. It could be anyone that you feel comfortable talking to. There's some good books out there for emotional eating. One of my favorites is Intuitive Eating. And it's by two women. And of course, I'm blanking on their names right now, but it's just literally called Intuitive Eating. And so you have to be careful when you have a high stress job and you are coupling that with a high stress training, and then you're asking yourself to maintain a certain weight. And so you really have to be careful that you're doing what's best for your health. And that might mean having someone from the outside looking in, helping you with that, because oftentimes we have a hard time seeing the big picture when it's just ourselves looking at what's in front of us versus an outsider helping us with something, if that makes sense.
It does. So what about the dangers of undereating in this same situation versus overeating?
Yeah, so typically, if an athlete is undereating and they're not to the point of restricting so much that it's causing disordered eating, or it's kind of reached that level of, I don't want to say anorexia because it doesn't have to get to that point to affect their performance. But if someone is feeling like they are, or if someone is noticing, a friend or a coach is noticing an athlete, kind of the same thing applies. I would encourage that athlete to reach out to a dietitian or a sports nutritionist, someone who can help them to figure out what their training calories, like, okay, if you're doing that, 2-hour run, how many calories should I be taking in? Or after that 6-hour ride, how much should I be refueling with? If it's just they're not sure, like, where their numbers are and they don't want to gain weight, that's one thing. But if an athlete really is having a hard time and feels like they're entering that realm of disordered eating, or they feel like they can't eat because they don't want to gain weight and they get down that path of being really restrictive, that's when you might need someone who's trained in helping athletes with those emotional eating, whether it's undernourishing or overnourishing. You might need someone to step in who can help with that.
Okay. So I don't want to dive down the rabbit hole too much, but how can athletes actually filter through Google certified nutritionists, registered dietitians? How can people find and filter that out the right way to actually find somebody that's going to fit their needs?
Sure. There are so many people, and there's a lot of certifications, or even like, I don't want to say weekend certification or 2-day certifications. And then someone will decide that they can hang their shingle out and give nutrition advice. Well, really, you want to make sure that you're finding someone that has the education to back it up. So I would always start with, if you can look for someone in your area, it doesn't have to be in your area, but if you want to see someone face to face, often seeking out a registered dietitian, you can go through the program website. It used to be called SCAN.org, and it was that is a list of registered dietitians. If you feel like you're struggling with any disordered eating or anything like that you need to reach out to, you can start with that route. If you want someone who can help with planning your training nutrition and your race day nutrition and just general nutrition help, but you don't need that next step of the kind of the psychology route of things, then someone like myself with a master's in sports nutrition, and I have a few certifications through the International Olympic Committee and the International Society of Sports Nutrition. So someone like myself, I work with athletes who are mainly healthy, that want to perform better, but don't have issues with the disordered eating. But if you have someone who is, I'd say, like, look for keywords. Like if someone outs things like the words detox, if they say that your body needs to cleanse or be detoxed, you know that they don't have a science-based education and that you don't want to go that route. If they are maybe, I don't want to put down like a realtor, I'm just thinking of a job, like if they're a realtor by trade, or if they're a financial analyst by trade, and then they're also a nutritionist on the side, most likely they don't have enough nutrition education to really help someone. So think about where you're starting. Like, do you need more help than the average person can give you? Should you start with that registered dietitian or physician? Or do you just need general nutrition help, and then look for someone who has the science background and the education first and foremost would be the next step. So it's kind of like a two-parter. How much help do you need? Like, is it emotional or is it just performance-based? And then you can kind of narrow it down from there.
Okay. And this can be actually done over the phone via FaceTime. I mean, you don't really need to actually go in person, and you can actually pay over the internet now securely to people directly. I mean, it's pretty simple these days, right?
Yeah. Like for myself, like the athletes that I work with, if someone happens to be local to Fort Worth, then I have no trouble meeting with them, like at a coffee shop or something. But I'd say 95% of the athletes I help, it's via email, via Skype or FaceTime, phone calls, things like that. But again, if someone needs additional help with maybe disordered eating, then I would recommend they sit down in person with someone, because that amount of help with nutrition, you really want to have someone, in person helping you.
Okay. So let's just talk about, being that we're on the weight subject, do you feel like there should be an upper weight limit to doing full distance Ironman because of risk related to injury?
I've actually no one's ever asked me that question before. Honestly, I am more of the belief that we are our own best advocate, and we understand our bodies. And so if someone wants to go train for an Ironman and they weigh maybe at the upper level of what might be considered, healthy, I wouldn't tell anyone to not do it, because I feel like we're all autonomous, or we can make those calls ourselves. So I don't think I would, unless a physician had a medical order that said this person has a heart condition or this person has something wrong, then I would say to each his own. Each person can make up their own mind on what they think is what their ability level is or what they can handle. But
yeah, the reason I asked that is because as a larger person, they're going to need more calories per hour to fuel. And you can only fuel so much per hour before your body starts rejecting the number of calories you're giving it. So then at that point, it becomes like a balance there. And if you go too much, it's setting up that person for failure. Does that make sense?
It is, but at the same time, so my one recommendation for athletes who want to train long or really train for anything is to practice their nutrition for weeks to months before they race. So that athlete should know 4 or 5 months out from their race whether or not their body can handle the intake of calories and whether or not they can run after a 6-hour, bike ride. So really, if you're practicing, like not every single workout clearly, but most workouts over 90 minutes to 2 hours, I recommend athletes have nutrition on board. Not necessarily because they need it. You often will, because that 90 minutes to 2 hours is where the liver will start to be depleted of glycogen, but more so because you have to train your body, you have to train your GI system to be able to take in the calories and the carbohydrates, just as you train your body for running a marathon or doing an Ironman. So that athlete, no matter their size, should be practicing their nutrition so they know, well, by mile or hour 7, my body rejects everything and I can't go on. And maybe that would tell them I should drop back to a half Ironman, or I'm going to focus on an Olympic until I'm ready to do something longer, or until I've reached a healthier or goal weight. That could be something to kind of, they should know kind of going into it. They shouldn't just sign up and then race day be like, well, this is 8 hours longer than my longest workout, so that
right. Now, I'm not saying, I just want to be clear. I'm not sitting here saying that I'm trying to shun people away if they're above a certain weight. Just from a physiological standpoint, it seems like there could be a tipping point of if you're over this much weight, you can't absorb this number of calories, and because of the balance of how many calories you need versus what you're expending is too much, and that's when you're going to be setting yourself up for failure.
And that's true. I'd actually probably put out that they would probably slow down and have to walk or easy pedal on their bike, and they would not make cutoff. That's probably what's going to happen before their body rejects the food intake, because the way our body works physiologically is that we can, take in, like, let's say it's an approximate, but you can take in approximately half the number of calories you're burning per hour on the bike. So say you're burning 600 calories an hour, you can take in about 300 calories an hour. So if this athlete, is burning whatever number of calories per hour, and they're starting to get GI distress because their body can't, it's just hard to absorb the calories, most likely they're going to slow down and they're going to either have to soft pedal, walk on their bike, or walk on the marathon, and they'll get pulled. So from that standpoint, they're going to get a DNF because they probably haven't made the cutoff. And that is an emotional thing. But if they know that they're just going to, their likelihood is it's a DNF, I'd still say that as long as the doctor okays it, they're
from a physical standpoint, they're good.
Yeah, as long as the doctor's okayed it. The slower you go, the easier it is for your body to be able to absorb and utilize calories and carbohydrates. It's the higher intensity, the more the blood is pulled from the stomach and GI system to the working muscles. So the slower you're going, the less likelihood of having GI distress. The higher intensity, the more likely. So if the athlete just continues to slow down, like often, like you might know an athlete or yourself, like if you were having GI distress and then you just started walking, sometimes it can go away because the walking allows the body to kind of reset. So just slowing down often is a good way to decrease GI distress. So that athlete most likely would be pulled or stopped before they got to the point where they did any physical harm.
Okay. So I know we talked a little bit about the hormones a little bit, but there's actually a lot more in the hormones versus male versus female how does this play into losing weight, staying the same? And I mean, I know you just went through pregnancy, so that's a whole nother ball game. And I know Michelle Vesterby is currently pregnant, which I am like so happy for. Like, I've been following her for a while now, and she's still working out 20 plus hours a week. And I know she's posting that on Instagram. I wish she'd post like, what is she eating day to day? That would be more interesting to me. But how would hormones play into this factor as well?
So I'm definitely not a hormone specialist, but males who obviously have more testosterone. So typically some of our hormones. So on the female side, we store fat more easily, and it's also harder to lose fat. And that does come back to, as you just mentioned, pregnancy. So when you're pregnant, your body actually will store additional fat for the baby. And so due to the nature of women being women to produce, it is harder to lose weight, and it tends to be easier for men to lose weight because they have testosterone, which is just it's not a hormone that stores fat. It's not like women with estrogen. So from a weight loss standpoint, women do have a harder time. But I guess I'll give a little bit of pushback and say, actually, research shows us that because of the women's ability to use fat as fuel more efficiently, without trying to go fat adapted, we can use fat more efficiently for long distance racing. So that is why a lot of times women tend to be not stronger long distance athletes, but have a performance benefit from being able to use fat as fuel, just because of our hormone levels. Right. I know it's not what you're asking.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, to go down that rabbit hole a bit more, I mean, if you start looking at the 24-hour endurance races, the multi-day events, women actually stand a lot better chance to win than men, because men can go short term in theory. I don't know if you call 8 hours short term, but if you're going short term versus long term of distance, women have a better chance to win versus men because of that, right?
Yeah. So women just like, it's kind of that catch-22. We don't want to have to, have the extra fat on board, but it is nice that we have the ability to utilize our fat stores differently than men do. So if women have, I like to give a range of like the, 12 to 15% fat is where like the cutoff for women is, and men have 3% cutoff. So men tend to have less essential fat stores. Like if you're at 3% body fat and a female is at 18% body fat, our ability to tap into our fat stores tends to be, we have that benefit. And so men don't have that same kind of benefit of utilizing it. And I don't have any, numbers or statistics for like long distance races, or for like, oh, women, like this percentage finished versus this, but I do know women have the ability to race longer. And part of that is because we have the additional fat stores, or we can tap into our fat burning capabilities a little bit easier.
Right. I know Camille Herron just set the 24-hour world record on a track, which is like 169 miles.
That's amazing.
651 laps in 24 hours. Just ungodly. Okay.
That's terrible for, like, I couldn't do that.
Yeah, mentally, okay. Physiologically, that's totally different. But mentally, man, that's a lot of loops.
Yes.
So a little bit more about the hormones. I know there's a lot of new things with hormones, T centers on almost every corner here in Dallas. I'm sure you've seen them. But there's also implants that women can get for hormones. And this is somewhat banned, right?
Yes. So I'm not sure 100% what's banned. So with their, like the IOC and specific government, governing bodies will have specific levels of hormones that you have to either have, like with, it gets down the whole, transgender kind of rabbit hole, or kind of I'm not sure what the right word is, but women need to have hormones within a specific level. And it's not like a woman can just go to a testosterone center and get injected with testosterone or things like that, because we have a certain level testosterone that would be considered, here's your female testosterone, here's the male kind of like the cutoffs. And so yes, from an international racing standpoint, there are specific rules for hormones, but for sure you would not want, a woman would not generally just go out and do a testosterone injection. And so for men, what happens is, unless a man really needs the testosterone for a medical reason, the body actually will start to produce less and less testosterone. And so I worked with 2 athletes that were overtrained, so far overtrained. They were both male, that they were at such a low level of testosterone that their physician said the options were they could go on testosterone injections for the rest of their life, because once you're getting injections, the body will produce less and less, or they could stop training. And both of them decided to stop training. It took about a year for them to recover from an overtraining standpoint. It's like
really?
one was doing, I think he did 4 Ironmen in a year, and his body just couldn't handle it. It wasn't one of my athletes that I coached. It was just someone, when we lived in Oregon, we owned a triathlon shop. And so he was one of the athletes that used to work out at our shop. And then so was the other one, actually. They were both in Oregon. But the other athlete as well had the same thing happen. And so the body does, it's amazing, but the body knows if it's under so much stress and it decreases the level of natural production of testosterone, you have to rest to bring the level back up, or you can start the injections. But going on injections without needing them medically was definitely a no-no. Kind of like the same thing with melatonin, which is not at all on your the question you asked. But so melatonin is the sleep. Like people would take melatonin to help them sleep. It helps with the circadian cycle, but the body, it's actually a hormone, and the body actually naturally produces melatonin. So if you take melatonin too often, the body will start to produce less and less. And so you have to be careful that you're not taking things like melatonin that you think is a natural, like, oh, this is sold at CVS, so it must be okay. But the body will produce less and less. And so you don't want that to happen. So you just have to be judicial on when you're taking your melatonin for sleep.
Now, to go down this is going to get more than likely ugly, because it has to be addressed. But I've known athletes that go to the Olympic Training Center, and everywhere at the Olympic Training Center is stated, you own what you eat. Regardless of anything, you own what you put in your body. Like, regardless if it's through a needle, through oral, through ingesting, whatever, you own it. And that's part of your whatever. If you buy it at GNC, CVS, Target, Walmart, wherever, you own it. And if you're caught doping, it doesn't matter where it came from. You're a doper at that point. But with the FDA in place, it doesn't really protect the common people against doping, where other countries have a little bit more stricter things in place to be certified and all that. The FDA doesn't really protect us against that. How can we take other measures to prevent that?
Yeah, it's actually the FDA looks into things after the fact. You're right. So the FDA will go in and kind of check and do its thing. It's just not pre-supplement, it's post-supplement being put out there. So in order to make sure that what you're taking in is going to be banned supplement free, you want to, there's 2 companies that I trust for supplements, and not the company, but 2 certifying bodies that I trust. One is called Informed Choice, and the other is called NSF certified. And so you can go to, it might be, you double check this, anyone listening, but it might be like informedchoice.org or an NSF certified. You can probably put those in Google. And then under each of those companies, or each of those like certification kind of standards, like those 2 companies list all of the products that have been certified under them. Let's say you want to do a multivitamin. You can go on to NSF certified and find which vitamins are certified NSF certified for banned supplements. And so if you're taking an NSF certified or an informed choice supplement, you can be, you know, probably 99.9% sure that there is nothing banned in there. If you're taking something that's not under those two certifying body kind of organizations, there's no way to know that there's not going to be cross-contamination. So kind of like, you know, here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, you know, without going into too many details, you know, if there was a product that was cross-contaminated.
And a pro got banned.
And yes, that athlete got banned because the product they were taking most likely wasn't something they were trying to use to, you know, as a performance enhancing illegal supplement. It was that the product they were using was a smaller company who did not get the informed choice or NSF certified. And so they were most likely produced in a manufacturer that produced multiple products and there was cross contamination. So that's the hard thing is I do think you do have to own what you take, but for anyone who is going to be drug tested, whether they're a professional athlete, whether they're an age grouper, just know that anyone who has the ability to get drug tested should really only stick to supplements that are make sure that they've been triple checked, which is what those two companies do. They're like triple checking supplements. And then on top of that, just, you know, choose most of your nutrition choices as, you know, whole foods. If you want to have some protein and, you know, I'm all for protein drinks and, you know, recovery drinks and stuff. But if you are nervous about that, you know, have some, you know, grilled chicken after your workout or have some, you know, yogurt or cottage cheese or, you know, there's definitely lots of ways to get protein and that you don't have to go the supplement route if you're nervous.
Right. And, you know, just right now I looked up Informed Choice and F2C has all their product lines by Informed Choice.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably one of the reasons why they actually have a lot, like just based on all the people I've interviewed, that's like the highest nutrition company I've interviewed for. Do you think that's one of the reasons because of that?
It could be like if you're like talking about a pro triathlete or a high level age grouper who, you know, still age groupers will have, will get drug tested as well. And same thing with other sports like age group, you know, cyclists, you know, age group, you know, runners, anyone who is at the ability of, you know, winning or, you know, making a championship kind of thing, anyone's at risk for being drug tested. And so if you just want to be absolutely sure. Now, then there might be a company like, you know, like GU or something may not be NSF certified or informed choice, but they are such a large company that they'll have their own manufacturing headquarters. So when, you know, like Power Bar was the same way. Power Bar had like maybe 3 or 4, I'm going to say plants. I don't know if that's the right word, but manufacturing plants in the US. And so they didn't have to worry about cross-contamination because only their products were manufactured at their plants. And so a large company like a, you know, Gatorade or GU or something like that is going to be, you're not as at risk. Whereas small companies like small startups or supplements that maybe, you know, like just have the ability to be cross-contaminated, whereas like a GU, it's harder to be cross-contaminated than it is, say, like a branched-chain amino acid supplement or creatine. Those are easier to have that cross-contamination happen. So I wouldn't worry too much about things like products like Cliff or GU, but definitely you could, smaller companies that are more startups that don't have the additional income revenue to pay for the certification, then, you know, it would be wise to choose products that are, you know, are going to be less likely to have at least the ability to be cross-contaminated.
Right. Because I think it's a lot of money just to get tested by the Informed Choice, right?
I'm sure. I don't know what numbers are, but I do know that it's not free to just, you know, list your products, you know, on this site. And so they're gonna have to pay. And so if someone's a small startup, they probably don't have that in their budget, which just means that it doesn't mean you shouldn't use them. It just means you're more at risk for something maybe being cross-contaminated. And then, as you said, you have to own it. So
right. One thing that I tell pros when we talk offline after their interviews is make sure if you do buy a product that you get off the shelf, buy 2 and keep 1 in storage and use 1. And if the lot number is the same for the next bag you buy, that's fine. But for every lot that you buy, hey, now then you have 1 for that. If you ever do get tested and you do have something, you have an open container and a sealed container for proof.
That's a good idea. Yeah. They can certainly do that. But then again, I would tell them I wouldn't take it in general. If they have to be that nervous about keeping something, I would just hesitate to take that. And I would just say, don't take it and then don't worry about it.
Right. Well, I've only been saying that just recently because I found out that the pro athlete here in the Dallas area, they had a sealed container and an open container, and because of that, their penalty was a lot less because they could prove that they didn't actually put that in there.
That's great. And that is awesome that they were able to. I did not know that, so that's awesome that they were able to show that and prove that, because I have to imagine that I'm sure there's a lot of athletes that cheat for the sake of cheating, but there's a lot of athletes who maybe it's just, not wrong place at the wrong time, but wrong product at the wrong time. And it's not that they were trying to cheat. It's just, it's something that happened.
Right. So as far as just a day-to-day nutrition prepping standpoint, how should people meal prep? I know there's a lot of stuff going on right now with intermittent fasting and then eating 8 to 10 meals a day, having a certain amount of protein intake a day. What kind of guidance would you give endurance athletes?
Yeah, and it's going to be super individual based on the person's work, home, training schedule, because, people may not have time to eat 8 to 10 times a day, just with their work and home life. And so knowing kind of your own schedule is going to be first and foremost. I think that meal prepping is something that's really can be beneficial to a lot of people. Prep things on Sunday and then have things ready for the rest of the week. But my nutrition would be, I'm a big fan of everything in moderation, meaning no foods are off limits. I'm a fan of not restricting and not depriving yourself of something. So oftentimes endurance athletes are so strict with food that they start to go down that disordered eating path when they say, I can't have this, and they have a list of 15 things they can't have. And so instead, they're spending all their time focused on, things they can't have instead of how to fuel your body appropriately. So if you start with the fact that there's no food that's ever off limits. So if you want to have, it's your birthday and you want to have a piece of cake. If it's, you want to have a beer after a run with friends, if you want to, have anything that could be considered off limits for an athlete, just kind of take that out of your vocabulary and know that there's nothing off limits, but it's the 80-20 rule. So 80% of the time, choose foods that are really nutrient dense. So chock full of vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants. And 20% of the time, choose foods because you want to. So, if you're having, let's just say a salad is an awesome option because you can always make a really balanced salad. You can do, leafy greens, and then you can have your protein. You can do some grilled chicken or some beans or lentils on top.
But you're not saying just covered in ranch.
No. So everything in moderation again. So think of everything. I think of think of your meal or a plate and think about mostly vegetables with lean protein and healthy fat. So if you're wanting to put salad dressing on, awesome. Do an olive oil based salad dressing and sprinkle it on.
Like a vinaigrette.
Like a vinaigrette. Yeah, you can make your own or just, get one at the grocery store, like a balsamic vinegar. And something you can do nuts and seeds sprinkled on top, slice an avocado. That's your healthy fat. And then Make sure you have your protein, so it can be a vegetarian or vegan option, and then your carbohydrates. So your salad is a carb, but if you're an athlete, you often need more than just your greens and your, carrots and red pepper and things like that. Throw on some brown rice, throw on some quinoa, maybe some roasted butternut squash, something like that, and you've made a complete meal with a carb, fat, and protein. But doesn't mean you have to be like eating like one of those, like diet salads where it's like, a cup of leafy greens and that's it. I don't know. There's no need to restrict or deprive. As an athlete, the more color you can get in, the better. But there's nothing wrong with having, whole grains. Like this morning I had oatmeal for breakfast. That's a fantastic breakfast for endurance athletes. You can, have, if you want to. You can have rice if you want to. Like, there's nothing off limits. It's all about eating to fuel your training, and it's individual. And so that's why it's hard to give like a blanket statement. But someone who's maybe working a physical job plus they're training for Ironman versus someone who's training for a sprint triathlon at 5 hours a week and has a desk job, they're going to eat a lot differently than someone who's, maybe works in a like a warehouse or a factory where they're on their feet for 10 hours a day, plus they're doing 15 hours of training. Their nutrition's going to look different. They need to eat more. They need to have more carbohydrates, most likely. So you really want to focus on what your, home life work schedule is, and then what your training schedule is. And you make nutrition choices based on the period you're in. So if someone's off season, or if someone's in their, highest intensity season, they're going to eat differently, whether, depending on whichever time of year they're training or whatever, like their, 5 hours versus 15 hours is a lot different from, nutrition standpoint.
Okay. So I know we haven't talked about this yet, but I don't even know if this would be in your scope of nutrition, but meal prepping is great, but there are limitations to food prepping because you don't want to keep food for too long after you cook it. And this can lead to food poisoning, which does bad things to the body versus good things. What are some guidelines to help prevent food poisoning because of overexposure?
Yeah, this one's when I'm certainly not. I actually started off as a microbiology major in college, and I decided I didn't want to work in the laboratory for the foreseeable future. But if I were prepping or encouraging my athletes to prep, it's typically only like 3 days of prepping and kind of like 3 days out of prepping. But certainly the most basic ones would be things like the refrigerated. Like, you don't want to cook something and leave it in the refrigerator for like a week, or something that's refrigerated. You don't want to leave it out all day, not on the refrigerator. That would be a certain no-no for growth of, harmful bacteria.
Right. I know when I was in Afghanistan the first time, there were signs at every dining facility that said 40 minutes outside of the 40 to 140, like 40, 40, 40. And 40 minutes outside of, or in between the 40 to 140 degree temperature. Like, that way, it's getting below 40 to kill the bacteria, or above it to kill it as well. But anywhere in that range is bad. And
yeah, it depends on the temperature too. Like, if you're, here in Texas, if it's super, super hot out and you've left something out, the bacteria can grow really quickly in certain environments. And so you don't want to leave a refrigerated, product, or, just food that was going to spoil. You can't leave it out. So you have to, you have to make sure that you're following proper guidelines. But yeah, if you're like one of like my food prep, like I like to do a lot of roasted potatoes. Like, say you roast 4 sweet potatoes and roast them on a Sunday, and then take a chicken in a crock pot, and you can do like maybe chicken with some salsa and shred it. And then for the next 3-4 days, have a roasted potato with chicken, salsa, chop up some avocado. You could do in some brown rice or something, and make a roasted protein carbohydrate, and you can have that for lunch or dinner. Like, that's like an easy meal prep, thing you can do that most people would like. But you're not gonna, don't leave the chicken out, on the counter, or don't leave it, just make sure that meat and dairy and things like that are going to be refrigerated for sure. But and then keep your prepping to don't try to prep 10 days in advance. Just try to keep it like 3 to 4 days
right
out.
And even if you go to a restaurant and get something to go, don't go shopping and then go home and put in the fridge. Like, I feel like that's a big no-no that some people do.
Well, especially if it's 90 degrees in Texas, the car is going to be way over 100. So if you left food in a hot car, then yes, it's definitely, you don't want to consume that if it's been sitting out for 2 hours, in a 110 degree car. So yeah, but I'm definitely I'm not a microbiologist. But yeah, just be smart with your food prepping and make sure you're just following, guidelines of the fridge, and don't leave food out all day, and don't prep like 2 weeks ahead of schedule.
Nice.
It's just not going to be good.
So just to kind of wrap up here a little bit, I only have one more question left, and that's really just the caffeine and water intake. So from a day-to-day aspect on both water and caffeine, and then on race day, how should people implement both of these appropriately?
So caffeine is one of the best ergogenic aids. So really something that's going to increase your performance. One of the best kind of researched supplements out there. So I'm a big fan of caffeine. I actually don't drink coffee, but I do caffeine when I'm racing. There are some responders and some non-responders. So some people will not respond to caffeine, and others can take caffeine and they're like, whoa, like I can feel it. And so you need to figure out whether or not it's going to actually work for you. If you are a fan of caffeine, then research tells us that 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram.
You broke up there. Can you say it again?
Oh, sure. What part?
The how many milligrams per kilogram?
Okay. So caffeine should be taken at 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram. Now, here in the U.S., we're in pounds, and so to figure out how many kilograms you are, you take your weight in pounds divided by 2.2. So let's say you're 100 kilograms, and it's 3 milligrams per kilogram. That's 300 milligrams of caffeine. That is a lot of caffeine. So I would start at the very low end of the caffeine kind of spectrum. I would even start at, let's say, 100 milligrams as like a low end. My rule for athletes is no more than 500 milligrams of caffeine total. So if you're doing a race that's less than 5 hours, you could take caffeine right from the start. If you're doing an Ironman where you're going to be out there for, say, 12 hours, I'd focus on taking caffeine in the latter half of the race, maybe right at the end of the bike, going into the marathon, or kind of depending on how much you're taking in. If you're doing 75 milligrams an hour, you could maybe take it the last 2 hours of the bike and then on the marathon. So kind of figure out, where's my 500 milligram cutoff? And then also you can use that, 3 milligrams per kilogram as a starting point, knowing that is going to be a lot of caffeine.
So I interviewed, I might get the person wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was Jesse Vonderchek from Ironman Texas this year. He started his race. It could be Jesse. I could be wrong there. It was a pro from Ironman Texas. I know that. But he started his race with a Red Bull at a full distance Ironman. Is that good? Bad?
So since nutrition's personal, it might work for him. And if he normally does coffee in the morning, like if you're a habitual coffee drinker, just having the coffee in the morning and then having your caffeine at the tail end of the bike, that's not going to hurt you because your body is so used to the caffeine.
Right. I only think it was a half a can.
Yeah. So it might be more mental for him, but it's more like if you've just had 100 milligrams of caffeine and then, 10 hours later, not for a pro, but for an age grouper, 10 hours later, you have more caffeine, that's not going to affect you. But if you're taking a large dose right when you start, and then you don't take any for a couple hours, you could feel like, so caffeine's actually a neural stimulant. It doesn't provide you energy. It actually works in the brain. And so it's more of that you might feel fatigued. You might feel like the way I always describe it is caffeine doesn't give you energy. It allows you to focus more. So often in long distance racing, you start to lose focus. You start to like look around on the bike, or you're on the run and you're like, oh, the water's so pretty. I want to go for a swim. You know, you're not really focused on your race. Caffeine allows you to kind of focus on that race. It's a stimulant. And so, so if you have a stimulant early on and then you have a stimulant not till later, that can affect you. But you might still be able to do your coffee in the morning and then, or a Red Bull, and then wait until the latter half of the race and go, with additional caffeine.
Right.
So it's kind of personal.
Yeah. With almost everybody pre-race, they always do coffee, then breakfast, drink a little bit of water right after breakfast. By the time they put their hair up or get a shower, it's time to poop. Everybody's got to get their morning poop in before the race. But I think I've only talked to maybe just a handful of people that don't do the coffee, or they do decaf coffee, or they do caffeine pills versus coffee because they want the diuretic effect that it's going to provide versus the actual liquid content in the stomach.
Yeah. And you can certainly do, you know, your coffee in the morning, or caffeine pills in the morning. And it will help you to go to the bathroom. There's other things that can help too, if you're not a coffee fan, but, like I help athletes to figure out, what their best, like in the 3s leading up to the race or the day before, how to taper down with fiber, how to figure out what exactly is the best option for an athlete to not have GI distress come race day. Like that's a lot of what I do is focus on GI distress. And, so I'm used to talking about poop and things like that. Yeah, you don't need the coffee, but that is something that a lot of athletes use just to help them go to the bathroom before the race.
Right. Now,
so I am a fan of caffeine.
So what about caffeine, tapering the caffeine in the weeks prior, like completely eliminating it and then reintroducing it on race day? Does that help? Does it really matter? Does it do anything? Or is that just mental? It's
mostly mental. So most athletes tell us, and most research tells us, that you don't need there's no need to caffeine. There really is no evidence that tapering off of caffeine will make you feel effects of caffeine more. If mentally you really want to taper off caffeine, you don't have to do, like, it used to be like an old, like 2-week taper. And if you're addicted to caffeine or having your coffee, that you're going to torture making yourself go off of caffeine, if there really is no benefit. So you could, in practice, maybe try like a 3-day caffeine taper to see if you feel like it affects you more. But really, I tell athletes there's no need to caffeine taper, so don't torture yourself by not having coffee the days before your race.
Wow. So I've only experienced one athlete that did this in the past, and now hearing that caffeine taper is useless, it's like she was just putting herself through hell for nothing. I mean, she was getting headaches. Yeah. I mean, she was feeling in a bad mood. I mean, it's like,
so it's a drug. It's a legal drug, but for sure, if you're used to having, say, 200 milligrams of caffeine, and then you don't have that, you will get headaches and you will feel lousy and things like that. But for her, she may, she might feel better with a caffeine taper, like from a race standpoint, performance standpoint. But I would challenge her to do 2 race simulations in practice and do 1 caffeine taper and then a race simulation, and then do, 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, do another no caffeine taper and then a race simulation, and see if she feels any differently. And my guess is she wouldn't, and she was just torturing herself, not meaning to, but just research tells us you don't need to caffeine taper, I guess.
Right. And I mean, I think that's just coming from the aspect of you think you're doing the best for your body, when in reality, science knows that there is no use in doing that. So
yeah, and sometimes science is behind and sometimes science is ahead. Like oftentimes athletes and nutritionists and people in our field, like after like working, say you work with 100 athletes and you see something time and time again, it might take science like a couple of years to catch up, and you're already like, oh, I already know anecdotally what's going to happen because I've worked with this many athletes. And other times science will discover something or figure out something before coaches and athletes do. So it's kind of cool how sometimes coaches and athletes see something before science does, and sometimes it's vice versa. But yeah. And then with hydration, did I get a hydration question?
Yes. So with water.
Sorry. I'm like, sorry. I can
Squirrel.
talk about.
Yes, it's okay.
I'm like, shoot, hydration. So with hydration, it's also very personal. Like, it used to be the 8 glasses of 8 ounces a day, so everyone should have 64 ounces of water a day. Well, there's not really any like, that's not really like hard and fast, like everyone has to have that. Athletes most likely need a whole lot more than 64 ounces, but it's something where it's very personal, so you want to see what's going to work for you. But I do want to just touch on making sure that athletes know that they should do sweat tests. So when it's hot out, like especially here in the South, for 6 months, if it's going to be super hot out, you're going to need more fluid than, say, in the winter, or maybe a northern climate athlete who doesn't have as much heat and or humidity. Like, say, in Houston, for Ironman Texas, it's going to be really humid as well. So I want athletes to do a sweat test. You can do multiple times a year. So maybe one in the winter when it's colder and less humid, one in the summer when it's, scorching out and it's super humid. You might need, on one part of the year, you might need 20 ounces of fluid an hour while you're training. And then the other time of year might be 28 ounces an hour. So, a basic hydration test, you can find a basic hydration test online. There's a couple different, just if you can Google, sweat test or hydration tests, that you can do that. But it's important to definitely have your fluid dialed in, so you know how much fluid you need, because hydration status will impact your race greatly. If you're underhydrated, it's going to be very detrimental. And if you're overhydrated, it can be very detrimental from something called hyponatremia, which can be pretty dangerous as well.
Right. I think the most water I've heard of so far is, I want to say it was episode 69 with Brian Abushan. He did enough Boulder this year, and I don't know if you know about Boulder this year. It's pretty hot. And I think they said it was over 100 degrees on the road. Brian consumed 24-ounce water bottles before mile 80.
Yeah, that is a lot of fluid.
That is a lot of water, and he did not urinate once.
I would actually say that he should go to a special lab, a sports science lab in the country, somewhere like a Gatorade Sports Science Institute. There's one in Illinois, one in Florida. There's other at any university, because the human body only has ability to take in so much fluid per hour, and there's a discrepancy in how much it is. But let's just say he was 4 or 5 hours, and he was doing that many bottles. So typically, I tell athletes a good starting is going to be 1 bottle per hour. So if he was out for 5 hours, and that would 5 bottles, and he did 20 bottles, that would be to me, that'd be an excessive amount. And so I'd want to know, from a physiological standpoint, he should have specific testing done at a sports science lab to make sure that there isn't something going on that he needs to have addressed. Because that would be a red flag to me as a physiologist. Like, that would be he needs to have someone actually study that. Right.
So what about salt? We haven't even mentioned sodium yet.
Yep. So this is, again, very personal. So from an average standpoint, I tell my athletes 500 to 800 milligrams of salt per hour is like a good base starting point. So some athletes might be up at 1,200 milligrams an hour. I've never had anyone less than 500, but I've had people over 800. But if you want to just give an average, where should I start? 500 to 800 milligrams per hour is a good starting point. And then you don't really have to, of the 5 major electrolytes, you don't really have to worry too much about the other ones, like, replenishing with magnesium and calcium, things like that. Some salt tablets or powders will have all 5 main electrolytes, and that's great. But really the only one you have to really focus on is the actual sodium. So our body loses so much sodium when we're sweating that's the one we want to replenish with. If you're worried about the other ones, do a tablet like a salt tab that has all 5 electrolytes, or like a Noon. But if you really want to dial things in even more, then you can find someone like myself or a company that has a sweat kit. And so what we do is we do like an hour test where we put a patch on your forearm or somewhere on your body, and we gather the sweat when you're sweating, and then we can put it into an analyzer, and it will tell us exactly how much sodium you lost in that hour. And that is a very specific scientific test to determine, how much sodium you have lost. If you don't have a testing center in person, because there aren't very many, you can do an online test. And I am, I'm not gonna say I was blanking, but it's like Levelin, L-E-V.
I've heard of that. Yana Retrova uses that, and I want to say a pro down in Austin uses that. I've heard of it a few times.
Yeah, it's pronounced, I think, Levelin. I'm not sure.
Yep.
But it's they will send you the kit. You do the test, you send it back, and then they spin it's like a Tegaderm. They spin like the Tegaderm kind of patch, and they'll extract the sweat from the Tegaderm, and they'll determine what your rate of sodium loss is. So that's a pretty cool, and you can do their multi-sport one, you can do their runners one, and then and go from there. So it's not too expensive either. I'm a big believer in the more knowledge you have, the better from a number standpoint. So knowing your sodium rate, knowing your sweat rate from a liquid hydration standpoint, dialing in how many grams of carbohydrate, how many calories, how much caffeine, like getting it all dialed in. That's kind of my I guess science is my thing. So the more dialed in you are, the better.
Right.
My opinion.
So we've talked a lot about the nutrition aspect. What else would you like to add before we sign off here?
Oh, sure. And really just that nutrition is super personal. So just if something doesn't work for you, don't get frustrated, or don't think like, oh, so-and-so does this, I need to follow it to a T, because it may be exactly the opposite of what you need. Yeah, so nutrition is super personal. So if a pro triathlete is eating a certain way, doesn't mean that it's going to work for you. Really practice. Know what your body specifically can handle. And then my kind of all over nutrition kind of advice is, don't believe someone just because they post to Instagram or Facebook, or someone that says, I lost 10 pounds or I lost 100 pounds. Do this 30-day detox or buy my cleanse. Anytime that you hear like a word, like a word that isn't like, I'm not sure if that's, true or not, like a cleanse or detox, that's like a red flag for me, where I want someone to be skeptical that person is using science as their, kind of the main kind of point. So be skeptical of believing anything you hear in social media or, just in the media today, and really try to reach out to someone who has a science degree, whether it's a registered dietitian or someone like myself with a master's degree in sports nutrition. And that's in exciting news. And in a couple of days, I'll have on my website, I created a 4-week program for athletes that want to dial in their race weight. So if you want to dial in your race weight in a healthy, science-based way, I have a 4-week, it's a 4-hour module where it's supposed to be each week you listen to a 1-hour module with a recipe book and just tips and tricks to help you achieve your race weight. And that is going to be launching on my website in just a couple of days. And then in another month or so, I'll have the same kind of concept, a 4-week, 4-hour kind of module of how to achieve your best race nutrition. So step by step teaching you how to dial in your nutrition kind of tips and tricks with things like what happens at heat, what happens at altitude, what happens when I race in the cold. I have lots of 4 hours worth of data to tell you guys, and a huge 50-page manual I wrote up for both the race weight and the race nutrition. So those are going to be on my website. So feel free to check those out. The race weight will be up in a couple days. The race fueling will be in the next couple months.
Awesome. So what's your website?
So my company is called Fueled Coaching. So FUELED coaching.com, and same name for the Facebook page. I try to do some videos on Facebook, or try to post at least some science-based stuff for you guys on Facebook. I do have an Instagram, but I'm less with my newborn and my toddler. I try to just at least be consistent on one social media platform.
Okay. So how can people follow you? Is it mainly just on Facebook then?
Yep. So mainly Facebook. I'd love to, have you come to my page, like it, follow me, ask questions if I do a Facebook Live. Right now, every Friday, I'm trying to do a Facebook Live to answer questions. And so please submit any question, send me an email. My email is, Cristina@fueledcoaching.com, or send me a message on Facebook, something you want to learn about, and I will talk about it on a Friday. Or I'd love to work one-on-one with you guys if you need help from a performance standpoint.
Wow, that's great. So just to wrap everything up here, what's your favorite food?
Actually, I'll give you my favorite pregnancy food is watermelon. With both pregnancies, I ate watermelon almost the entire pregnancy.
Really?
Seriously, I pretty much ate an entire watermelon every 3 days.
Wow.
Yes. So yeah, both boys are hopefully going to love watermelon. But I love fruit in general. So honestly, I'm kind of boring. I don't have the traditional foods pizza's fine, or I don't know, food. I love all food, but watermelon has been in the last couple of years my go-to.
Wow. That's pretty awesome. Well, Cristina, it's been great. I look forward to following you in the future and hopefully getting some more traffic over to your page and learning more about what's going on in the future with nutrition with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Terry. Have a great day, everybody.
All right. Have a good day. Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you were able to learn something from today's episode. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to leave a review on iTunes or share it with a friend. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you'd like to see pictures from this athlete's race, learn more about who I am, what I'm doing, or be on the show yourself to share your story, check out my website at CoachTerryWilson.com. Until next time, continue the pursuit.